right, let's just give it a minute and see if anybody shows up. I'm just scarfed down a curry. So let's see here. All right, good evening. Hello. Today we're going to do more stems, and we're going to do the stem stitch. So that's easy to remember, that stem stitch is great for stems. So what we're going to do today are these tiny little ones that you see here. Just the stem, not the leaves, just the stem. Okay, so we've got this one here. We've got this one here that kind of breaks off into two. And then we also have these two little guys over here. So that's it. That's all we're doing. I told you it was a beginner stitch along, and it totally is. We're just breaking this pattern down into little bite-sized chunks. And that way it'll be super easy to get through. So we're going to need 3 strands. So let's just separate that right now. And we're going to use the stem stitch. And the easiest way to do the stem stitch, we've already done it on the outside of here, but we're going to do it in a straight line here. So the easiest way to describe it is like stacking bricks, but instead of next to each other, they're on the same line. So they're going to be staggered like this, okay, on the same line. And I like to stitch my stem stitch on the hump. And what that means is you see that some stems, they might go straight up and down, but most of these, they have a slight curve to them or a slight little hump. And so the biggest debate with stem stitch is it a stem stitch or an outline stitch? And with the stem stitch, I like to have the loop on the hump. So whichever way it curves, if it curves like this, then your loop will be this way. If it curves like this, then your loop will be this way. So okay, sorry. It just paused for some reason for me. I was like, oh, okay. But I don't think that you guys will be affected because it's right back to where it was before. So we're going to do stem stitch and 3 strands. And this is going to go super quick. So I hope you're with me. And it looks very, very, very similar to the whipped back stitch. So here we go. You can start here at the top here or down here at the bottom. I'm going to start down here at the bottom. You're going to come up and make your loop. And what I mean by that is you're just going to make 1 stitch, but you're not going to pull it all the way through, just like we did on the woven wagon wheels on the outside edge, okay? And instead of going and pulling it all the way through and then carrying on with our stitching, we're going to come up in the middle of these 2 stitches. Okay. And then pull that tight, and we're going to make your next loop. So the distance from here to here and here to our next stitch are going to be the same. So like I said, we want the same size stitches. They're just going to be offset like this so that they're the same, but they're just not the same. They're just a little bit offset. So you're only going to go up a little half stitch there, then back up the same hole or the same hole-ish. Don't stress out about trying to get up through the same hole. It's completely fine if you don't. Just get it close. Especially because it will all be covered by your stem stitch. So again, we're just going up 1 more little half stitch up through the same hole. Some people get a little bit confused when they do it on the outside of a woven wagon wheel and when they do it in a straight line. I'm not quite sure why. It's the same stitch, but sometimes it just looks it looks different for some reason. And I often say, like I said before, the stem stitch and the whipped back stitch are very, very similar. They look similar. You can't really tell because this is a darker color thread, and I probably should have used a lighter color, but hey ho. I'll do a lighter color on these other ones. So that way you'll be able to see it a little bit better and see like how it looks almost like a rope. So when you finish, you'll just put your needle right back down. I do like a little half stitch at the end as well, just to make it so it's like a thick solid line. And I'll show you how to start it that way too. So in the end, you'll have a full solid line. So I'll do that with a lighter color on the other one just now so you can see what it is. I'm just looking for my Apple pencil. There it is. Okay. So this right here is what I mean. So if we've got the screen here, yeah, and you've got your, that's the eraser. You've got your line, okay? So normally when you do your stem stitch, people will start with one loop and then they'll start the next stitch here and do their next loop and their next loop and their next loop and their next loop. And then to end, they do a little half stitch here. But it also leaves the bottom with just one, okay? You don't get the double. You don't get the little area like right here and right here where they're overlapping. You just get that one. So sometimes the end of your stitches, especially if you make your stitches quite large, can look a little bit, how to explain it, like not hollow, but like weak, like not solid all the way. Do you know what I mean? So you can start with a little half stitch here and that will actually make it completely solid from the beginning to the end because you're adding that little half. So again, let's do it later so we can. Okay. So again, if you start with a little half stitch like this, all right, and then do your full one and continue like you normally do. And then at the end, you'll do your little half stitch again. You end up with a solid line. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. I'll show you on the other with a lighter color. And that way, hopefully you can see it a little better too, because I actually picked the color thinking it will look so great on with my color palette, but actually you can't see it. You can't see the stitches. So let's just grab a slightly lighter color here. Maybe like a lighter greenish one, kind of. Maybe like this one. Okay. And then we'll separate it into 3 strands just so that we're consistent. They're completely different flowers though. They're going to look different. And this way I'll show you the half stitch start. And I did get a comment up there that said that I'm really great at explaining the stitches, and thank you so much for that, because I really do try to show you very clearly, but also like explain it a little bit too, so that if you learn by watching, you can just watch. But if you learn by listening as well, then you can, get a little bit more information that way. Okay, so let's just turn it like this because it looks like this has a slight curve this way. So our loop is going to be on this side of the stem, of the hump. Okay, so here we go. Yeah, so we're going to do our little half stitch. Okay, just a little straight stitch. And then go back to the beginning and do your full stitch. Now, obviously, this is just going like a little over the top, okay? A regular stem stitch, you just start how I did before. This is only if you want to have a full solid line that's completely the same from the beginning to the end. Now, someone just asked the question, and is stem stitch the same as outline stitch? And I briefly mentioned it before, but the only difference is that you put the loop on the other side of the hump. Okay, so with outline stitch, it goes on the bottom. With stem stitch, it goes on the top. And that might be the other way around. I'm not sure. I don't ever use them like separately. Like I don't ever teach them separately, if you know what I mean, because this is why. I'll zoom out again. If you have your, this is where like getting technical is a bit like, okay. So you have your 2 lines. I'll just change the color so you can see. Okay. So we've got, you should be able to. Actually, if you drag, she says, do you know if these IGTV videos can be paused or fast forwarded once they are uploaded to Instagram? If you click them, you should be able to pause them. And if you drag the line at the bottom, then you can fast forward or rewind. You can also tap the side of the screen and it will fast forward. They're also going to be on YouTube. I've got the first 3 on maybe, or first 2, I'm not sure. But yesterday's video, there's actually 3 in total. And so I'm trying to see if I can make them into one video before I upload like 3 separate ones. But I might just upload the 3 separate ones anyways. Okay, so for one of them, the outline stitch or the stem stitch, you go like this. Okay. For the other one, you go like this. Okay, but here's my problem with this. If I turn it around like this, they look exactly the same. Do you see where I'm coming from? So actually, this one was the stem stitch and this one was the outline stitch. But if I turn it around, they're the same stitch. So there you go. That's my qualm. Hi, George. But they will look a little bit different if you don't turn them. And that just has to do with the way that they twist. So one of them twists up and the other one twists down. But I always like to put the loop on the hump because it tends to hide a lot of the stitch holes. So if you look this way, you can kind of see each of the stitches. But if you look this way, you can't. You can just see the twisty part. So I feel like it hides it a little bit more if you put the loop on the hump, like the way that I show it. So if you're one of those like diehard, like, nope, there is a difference, then that's fine. Have there be a difference. No one's trying to tell you wrong. Because some people are very much like, no, 100%. All that to say, yes and no. Oh, goodness. Good evening, Veronica. Okay. I got another. I can feel it, but I can't see where the knot is. I have to keep these colors now because I'm going to have my colors and my leaves be the same as my stems. So I want to make sure that I keep this color so I don't lose it. Okay, so I've just done the little half stitch at the very end. So now you have a solid line from the beginning all the way to the end. She says, I guess there's a difference if you don't rotate your piece while you work on it. You will have it will look a little bit different. Yes. But the most often I see an outline stitch used on something like a square. Like when people show examples, they'll do like an outline stitch on a square. And for me, the one on the top and the one on the bottom, the way that they explain it, they'd be different stitches. But they're the same. But you know what I mean? I went with no music today because I could not deal with another video that was broken up. So I decided actually I'm just going to go with nothing and see what happens. Okay, so we've got these two here done. I hope you can see this clearly. This is another one that's got the curve or the hump going this way, so the loop goes on the top. And then there's the very last one. Ooh, it's a little bit crazy. I'm having such a bummer of a morning. So glad to be stitching my troubles away. Oh, I'm so sorry. But you know what? The last couple, I'd say almost 2 weeks, have been quite difficult over here as well. So I know how it is, and I'm sorry that you are feeling that way, because it's just awful when things just don't seem to go right, you know? For whatever reason. It doesn't have to be like a big reason or anything like that. Just sometimes it just doesn't go right. Oh dear. So yeah, the first one over here without the half stitch looks like this. It's got that little twisty kind of look again. It's just missing that little bit at the beginning. Do you know what I mean? It's not very noticeable. So that's just me being a little bit of a stickler of when you start it off, it just looks a little bit skinnier and like not as complete, if that makes any sense to me. But you don't have to do that if you don't want to. Okay, let's do the very last bit and then we're finished. So here we have one going that way and then one going that way, okay? So if I was a teacher in like my art classroom, I'd be like, okay, class, for the first one, which way is the floss gonna be? Which way is the hump gonna be? But I won't do that to you guys. It's more important to try and make these about the same stitch length. Now with stem stitch, the shorter that you make your stitches, the more twisty they're going to look. And if you make them really, really tiny, they're going to literally look like rope, like that twisted kind of rope that you see. Like a traditional, if I were to tell you to draw like a rope, then you'd probably draw something that's like, you know, two strands like twisted around each other, you know? But if you make your stitches much longer, then they won't look so twisty. It will kind of just look like you can't see the actual stitches, you know, the stitch holes, kind of like when you do your back stitch before you do the whipped part. And that's why sometimes if I think, oh, back stitch just won't cut it here, I'll just use a stem stitch because you don't have to stitch it all the way to the top and then all the way back down again. You don't have to stitch it twice. You just do your stem stitch the one time. And it has the same kind of look as a whipped back stitch. Not exactly the same, okay, because they are different stitches, but similar. So sometimes I'll think, oh, if I just do a stem stitch here, I can just bang that out, do it real quick, and then I don't have to stitch it twice. The other part that I like to do a stem stitches for is things like outlines. So if you wanted to do a wee outline on this flower here, for example, and you think, oh, I just want something that's really simple, you can do a really, really small stem stitch outline around each of these petals. So obviously you're going to put your loop on the hump. So each one of these here, as you stitch around it, your loop is going to be on the outside of this flower. Okay. Now, if you did a whipped back stitch, you would do a back stitch around each of the petals and then go back and slide your needle under each of those stitches, just like we did for the stems. And I'm telling you, it's a pain in the butt sometimes because the stitches get so small because you want them to be curved, yeah? And if you make them too big, they start to look like this. Your stitches, they don't kind of flow together. They end up being quite pointy and like geometric looking. And you want them to have that nice curve for your petals. So yeah, sometimes I'll just put a little stem stitch around an outline. If I think, do you know what, this needs something else. It just needs a little something. You can always do a little stem stitch outline and it'll really fix it. I will say, just full of just beans this evening. I don't know why. I will say that if you have a darker color, you're not going to see the individual stitches as much. So if I decided for some reason I wanted to outline everything in black, I could just do a black outline with a backstitch and it would not matter, because when you use a dark color like black, all of your stitches blend together. You don't see the individual stitches as much. So if you ever are keen to do a little outline on something and you think, I really want to outline it, but I'm not really sure. I'm just trying to see if I've got a hoop that shows it. Kind of like this, like in the postcard. Okay, I'll show them. Hi, Mel. Okay, so do you see the turtle? This is all just a regular back stitch here. And then I did a stem stitch around the outside here. Okay, but then down here, I did a stem stitch, and the lighter the color, the more you can see the stitch. You can see each of these stitch holes like super easy, but the black, it's just a regular back stitch and you really can't see each individual stitch. You can tell it's stitched, but you can't really see like boom, boom, boom. So have a think about that when you are doing things like outlines too, especially if you want, to be able to see it clearly. Do you know what I mean? So if you don't mind having every stitch be shown, then choose whatever color you want. But if you really kind of want them to blend together, or if you want to outline everything, then just do black and do a backstitch outline. Simples. Oh, it would help if I actually showed you. Lord Almighty. There we go. So make sure that you save these colors of thread if you want to have matching leaves. If you do not want to have matching colored leaves, then you can use whatever colors that you want when we go to do the leaves. So I hope that makes sense. You don't have to have them matching, you know? You can always just pull whatever color you want out of your hat and put them on there, because that's totally fine. Now, I like to do knots on the back, but someone else said, what if we don't like to do knots on the back? The other thing you can do is slide your needle under the stitches that you've already done. Okay. And that way you don't have to do a knot if you don't want to. So some people don't like to do knots. They would rather just kind of weave it in and out like that. That's totally fine. If that's your vibe, do that. If you want to do a knot, you can do a knot. It's completely up to you. The other thing I want to say is I've seen a bunch of hoops and they look like so good. Okay. But a lot of them, as we've been working on these, they have become loose around the edges. So babes, you got to tighten that up. You got to tighten all of these up. So what I like to do before I even start stitching, give your fabric a good little yank all the way around. Okay. Tighten that nut up at the top. I'm not even going to say what this sounds like. Okay. Okay. Make sure this is nice and drum tight. So when you tap on it, you should hear that sound. If you run your fingers around the outside edge and your fingers are dropping down like that, then what you need to do is take that tape that I was telling you about before. You can have like masking tape, painter's tape, anything except like the plasticky clear tape. Do you know what I mean? Athletic tape, like any kind of tape. You can take cotton as well, strips of cotton, and you need to wrap your hoop where you're getting that loose piece. And that's really, really, really going to help. And this one here, nope, not that one. This one, yep, this one. This one here, because I needed a really big hoop and I didn't have one that was like completely perfect. So I've wrapped it in cotton and then used that extra tape in the areas that really needed it. And that way you have a nice tight drum. Okay, I haven't worked on this for a year and she's still nice and tight. So it's really going to help you, especially when we start doing some of the other parts of the pattern that you might have to pull really hard, or if you use 6 strands all the time, and you pull it through your fabric a lot, what's going to happen is that your fabric is going to, as you pull it through, okay, your fabric is actually going to be pushed down. You can't really tell, but it's going to be pushed down like that, which is pulling it out of your hoop. So you want to really tighten that up after your stitch session or before you start your next one, because if you stitch on it with loose fabric, you're just going to have a bad time. Okay. Now, if you're doing something like a towel or a t-shirt or something like that, you don't want it to be tight like this. So this only pertains if you've got a project like mine where you're going to display it in your hoop. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So today we did stem stitch here, here, and here. We learned 2 different ways to do it, and we used 3 strands. So I hope you had a lovely day, and I hope that your day gets better. Okay, if you're having a poor one, it gets better, don't worry. And yeah, I'll see you tomorrow, the end of week 1. And we're going to learn another new stitch. So enjoy, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye!